Hello, everyone. Welcome to English Pod. My name is Marco.
Hi, guys. My name is Catherine.
And today we're going to be looking at another lesson as part of our sports series. And this time, well, it's a debate. Is it a game or is it a sport?
Oh, it's a sport. You have to work your mind.
Yeah, so we're looking at chess, a very old, very popular sport, very difficult to play as well.
It takes a lot of practice. And believe me, it's frustrating at the beginning. And I'm still kind of in the beginning, intermediate stages. But yeah, it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of time to familiarize yourself with the rules.
Right.
So we're going to be learning a little bit more about the pieces and the rules today.
Okay, perfect. So we're not going to preview anything. Let's listen to the dialogue for the first time, and then we'll come back and talk about the sport.
Bobby, come here. Look what I got you.
What is that?
A chessboard. Daddy's gonna teach you how to play.
Cool.
Each player gets 16 pieces. You can be the white ones, and I'll play with the black pieces. Now in the front, you set up the pawns. Those are the least valuable pieces, and can only move one space forward. When you're about to capture another piece, it can move one space diagonally.
What about all these other pieces?
See this one that looks like a tower? It's called the rook. The one with the tall hat is called the bishop. See this little horsey? This is called the knight. It's a very important piece, so it's best not to let your opponent capture it.
And these two? They are husband and wife.
That's right. That's the queen, and that's the king. If the other player captures your king, he will say, "Checkmate," and the game is over. Doesn't this sound fun?
Nah, this sounds boring. I'm gonna go play Killer Zombies on my PlayStation.
All right, so the kid is obviously not very interested in learning how to play chess.
Not at all. You know, the art of these kind of slower games might be replaced very soon by video games.
I guess it doesn't really appeal to a little 9-year-old or 10-year-old instead of, playing something like this versus, shooting.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a very great game. It's very difficult, like we mentioned. So we're going to look at the name of the pieces and the rules that are related to these pieces in Language Takeaway.
Language Takeaway.
Well, the first one you might have heard before because this is a word that is often used in strategy in general. So the word pawn.
A pawn.
A pawn usually means something that is not very important that you can use to distract an opponent.
All right, so on the chessboard you have 8 pawns. So these are the ones that you have the most, but their movement is very limited. So
That's
they
right.
can only move 2 spaces forward on the first move, right?
Right, or one space after that.
1 space forward. And only when it's going to capture another piece can it move diagonally.
All right, so you can't just go diagonally. You have to go forward until you're going to take another person's piece to capture it and to go diagonally.
All right.
But pawns is funny. You can also use this word when you're talking about other things. He used her as a pawn in his little game.
No.
So you want to make an analogy. You want to make a comparison from life to these games. You can use the word
Pawn. Very good. Now moving on to the other pieces on the chessboard. On the very far ends of the board, you have the rook.
Okay, got 2 of these, and they kind of look like towers from a castle. And it's they're very important pieces, and actually my favorite pieces because they're not very important at the beginning of a game, but at the end of a game, boom, you can do a lot of damage because they can go anywhere in straight lines.
Right, so they can go forward, backwards, and to the sides, as many spaces as they want, the whole board.
Yeah, so easy pieces to forget about at the beginning, but they're very important.
And now next to the rook, we have the bishop.
Okay, this is very different from the rook because the bishop can also go anywhere, but they can only go diagonally.
Right, so only diagonally. They can also move 4 directions, but diagonally, right?
Exactly, so you can go forward and backward, but it has to be at a diagonal slanted line.
Okay, and now next to the bishop, we have the knight.
Ooh, the knight. So he's the one galloping on the horse like those old stories of King Arthur we used to hear. But the knight can go in an L shape, and I've never understood this. But
it's weird. So it can move 2 spaces forward and then 1 to the right or 1 to the left. Or it can move 2 spaces to the right and then 1 forward. So it's very strange, but it always has to move 3 spaces and in the shape of an L.
So I thought maybe he was the drunken piece. He can go forward a little bit, then thump, thump. He kind of moves to the side.
Right, so that's the knight. It's actually a very important piece as well. And now the 2 main pieces maybe of the chessboard, the queen and king.
So the king is kind of sad. He can only move one space, but the queen is really the killer because she can do anything she wants.
This is interesting, right? Why did they make it like that? The queen can move as many spaces as she wants in any direction.
Mm-hmm.
While the king can do the same any direction he wants, but only one space. I think there's some similarity between real life now. It's like the queen can do anything she wants and the king can kind of do whatever he wants.
Well, maybe he has the fact that he has to stay put and represent the country, and she can move around and move behind the scenes and has a little bit more mobility.
Maybe.
Who knows?
So, but in the end, the most important piece is the king, right? Once the king is captured, the game is over.
Exactly. So let's listen to today's dialogue one more time and slow it down a bit and find out if the boy understood any of these rules.
Bobby, come here. Look what I got you.
What is that?
A chessboard. Daddy's gonna teach you how to play.
Cool.
Each player gets
Vocabulary
16
preview.
pieces. You can be the white ones, and I'll play with the black pieces. Now in the front, you set up the pawns. Those are the least valuable pieces, and can only move one space forward. When you're about to capture another piece, it can move one space diagonally.
What about all these other pieces?
See this one that looks like a tower? It's called the rook. The one with the tall hat is called the bishop. See this little horsey? This is called the knight. It's a very important piece, so it's best not to let your opponent capture it.
And these two? They are husband and wife.
That's right. That's the queen, and that's the king. If the other player captures your king, he will say, checkmate, and the game is over. Doesn't this sound fun?
Nah, this sounds boring. I'm gonna go play killer zombies on my PlayStation.
All right, we're back. And now why don't we explain a couple of these phrases that we also use to explain the pieces. But let's look at some of these more in depth now in Fluency Builder.
Fluency Builder.
So, Marco, one of the first phrases that we heard was the phrase to move diagonally or a diagonal line. And so the pawns can sometimes do this and the bishop can do this. But what does it mean to move diagonally?
So basically, a diagonal line is not a line that goes straight up, right? Straight up to the sky, for example, or to the side. Right? It goes at an angle. So it's maybe going at 45 degrees or 30 degrees. So that's a diagonal movement or a diagonal line.
Exactly. The next phrase we have is very strange. And this one you might hear from parents or children.
He says, a little horsey.
Little horsey. So in many languages, we have ways of breaking down words or adding to words to make them sound cuter. And this is one of those cases. So, for example, little puppy or little kitty or kitten, these are words to make things sound cuter. So in this case, horse becomes
horsey. So I want to ride the horsey. It's a cute way of saying I want to ride the cute horse.
Mommy, I want to ride the horsey.
Exactly.
So baby talk often involves having these rhyming words. Mommy, horsey, doggy, puppy.
A doggy, exactly. Very good. So it's a cute way of saying something. And now when we were talking about the chess pieces, when another piece takes or gets a piece, you say it.
Okay, we say capture because, well, maybe it's a bit nicer than killing it, but capture means taking and keeping for yourself. So we have a very popular game in America called Capture the Flag.
Right, where you have to take each other's flag, right? You're stealing. So yeah, this is the term that is used in chess to capture another piece. Sometimes, like for example, in Spanish, we actually say like to eat the other piece.
Really?
You eat it. That's weird.
Well, we're a little bit more tame in English-speaking countries, but to capture is a very important phrase, and you're going to hear that in the news as well because you can capture a person.
You can capture a criminal. All right, and the final word and the way that you end a game of chess, you say checkmate.
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 So the game's over. Checkmate.
Well, there's two things that can happen at the end of a game. And, well, only one thing can happen at the very end of a game. But you're going to hear these two phrases. One is check and the other is checkmate. So check means that I can take your king if I want to. Move.
Right.
It's in danger. But checkmate is the end all. This means this is the very, very last part of a game where you cannot do anything. I've trapped you and I win.
Right. Very good. So the game is over when somebody says checkmate. Why don't we listen to this dialogue for the last time, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this very interesting game.
Bobby, come here. Look what I got you.
What is that?
A chessboard. Daddy's gonna teach you how to play.
Cool.
Each player gets 16 pieces. You can be the white ones, and I'll play with the black pieces. Now in the front, you set up the pawns. Those are the least valuable pieces, and can only move one space forward. When you're about to capture another piece, it can move one space diagonally.
What about all these other pieces?
See this one that looks like a tower? It's called the rook. The one with the tall hat is called the bishop. See this little horsey? This is called the knight. It's a very important piece, so it's best not to let your opponent capture it.
And these two? They are husband and wife.
That's right. That's the queen, and that's the king. If the other player captures your king, he will say, checkmate, and the game is over. Doesn't this sound fun?
Nah, this sounds boring. I'm gonna go play killer zombies on my PlayStation.
Pop quiz, Marco.
All right.
The word check and the word mate. They both have meanings in English, but put together, where does this phrase come from? What could it possibly mean?
I have no idea. Why don't you tell us? Because I seriously don't know where it comes from.
Okay, well, this is actually very interesting because I looked it up and I had no idea either because we've always just said this.
Right.
And it doesn't really make sense. So I looked it up on the internet and I discovered that the game of chess is actually a very ancient game. And it did not come from England. It did not come from France. It actually came from Persia. And in Persian, there are some words that kind of became the English words checkmate that mean the king is captured or the king is defeated. Right?
Okay. So that's what it means. It doesn't mean the king is dead.
No, it doesn't mean that he's dead. It means that he's been taken.
Okay.
And so over time, the Persian word went into Arabic and Arabic became French and English. And then now we say
checkmate. Okay, interesting. This is a very interesting word. And I'm sure everybody that's listening has a different translation for it in their own language. I know, for example, that in Spanish, we would say
jaque mate.
Right. So I guess like jaque is something's in check, it's in danger. And then mate, kind of like kill. So maybe it's probably not translated properly because as you mentioned, it should mean defeated or captured, not killed. So listeners, why don't you let us know how you say checkmate in your language? Come to our website, englishpod.com.
And also tell us if you have questions about the things we talked about today or if you want to share some stories of your own chess victories. Please get in touch with us on our website. Otherwise, you can email us at englishpod@praxislanguage.com. But until then, have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Second paragraph in the dialogue.
Welcome to another deep dive with us. You guys gave us a really unique source this time.
Yeah, an English learning podcast, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And it uses this father-son chess lesson to teach English.
I love that. What a fun way to learn a language.
And learn about chess.
Yeah.
We thought we could use it to, dive into the basics.
The basics of chess.
Not just the moves, but also, well, I guess we'll see what other interesting things come up.
Exactly. I mean, chess has been around for centuries, right? There's got to be some hidden depths there.
Definitely. So let's jump right in. Our source starts with this father and son setting up their board.
16 pieces each.
Classic black and white squares.
And then, of course, that ultimate goal, checkmating the opponent's king.
Right. But even in this setup, there's already something interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Just choosing white or black pieces. It's not just about looks.
It's about who gets to move first.
Exactly. White always goes first, and that gives them, well, a slight advantage throughout the whole game. It's kind of like those little advantages and disadvantages we all face in life,
That's a good point. So our source goes through each piece one by one. The father's explaining the moves to his son.
It's like we're getting a private lesson ourselves.
I know. First up, the pawn.
Often seen as the foot soldiers, they're limited in their movement, one square forward at a time.
Yeah, the source actually calls
Vocabulary
them the least
preview.
Valuable pieces.
But don't let that fool you. Think about it. Like in life, sometimes those small, seemingly insignificant choices we make, they add up.
That's true. And even though they only move forward, they can attack diagonally.
Exactly. It's like they're hiding their power. You underestimate them, and then bam, they take you by surprise.
They do have that sneaky diagonal attack.
And that limited forward motion, no going back. Just like in life sometimes. Every decision, every step you take, it has consequences.
Wow, I'm already seeing how every element of this game has deeper meaning.
Oh, absolutely. All right, so next to the pawn, we have the rook.
Which, I love how they point out, it looks like a tower.
Solid, strong, and they move in straight lines.
Forward, backward, side to side. Seems pretty straightforward.
It does. But that simplicity gives them control over entire rows and columns.
It makes me think of that saying, slow and steady wins the race. Sometimes the most direct approach is the most effective.
Exactly. Rooks are all about building a solid foundation, establishing control, being patient.
Okay, next up, we've got the bishop.
Now, these guys move diagonally.
But only on squares of the same color.
Right, so it's a bit more dynamic than the rook and more unpredictable.
Yeah, they have this kind of specialized viewpoint.
Like they're seeing the world through a particular lens, which can be a strength or a weakness.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. We all have our own perspectives, right? Based on our experiences, our beliefs, and those can sometimes limit us. But they also give us a unique way of seeing things.
So, recognizing our limitations, but also using our unique perspectives to our advantage. That's important in chess, but also in life.
Exactly. And now for the most unique piece on the board, the knight.
The one that jumps over others.
The one and only. And it moves in this L shape.
It is a weird movement. The father in our source calls it his little horsey, which I thought was cute.
I love that. It just shows how language can shape our perception. But you know, the knight, it kind of embodies this idea of breaking the rules.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you have to think outside the box to get ahead.
Exactly. So we've covered the pawn, the rook, the bishop, the knight. What resonates with you the most so far?
Honestly, I think it's how each piece, with its own abilities and limits, represents a different approach to strategy, like different personalities or something.
That's a great way to put it. It makes you wonder which piece best reflects your own approach to life's challenges. But we'll have to save that for later. For now, let's move on to the most powerful figures on the board.
The king and queen.
The king and queen. Our source really plays up this contrast between them.
Especially in terms of power, right?
Exactly. The father makes it clear that the queen, she's the powerhouse. She can move anywhere.
He actually says, and I quote, "The queen is really the killer because she can do anything she wants."
Whoa. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. Makes you think, especially considering, the history of chess and how the queen's role has changed over time.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about it. In earlier versions of chess, her moves were way more limited.
Really? So how did she become so powerful?
It's actually kind of interesting. It happened around the 15th century, when powerful queens were emerging in Europe.
Like real-life queens.
Yeah, exactly. Figures like Isabella of Castile, Elizabeth of York, they were making waves, and it seems like chess kind of reflected that shift in power dynamics.
So the game actually mirrors real-world changes in society.
It seems that way. And it makes you wonder, did that change in the queen's power on the board? Did that actually influence how people saw female leadership in real life?
That is fascinating. We've talked about how the pieces have these personalities, and now it's like they're reflecting cultural values too.
Absolutely. Games can be a lot more than just games, right? They can reflect our history, our beliefs. And speaking of the queen's power, I mean, what does that bring up for you? Any real life situations come to mind?
Well, for me, it says something about how influence, impact, it can come from unexpected places. Like sometimes it's not about brute force, but about strategy, flexibility, being able to see the whole picture.
Exactly. And the king, well, he's limited to moving just one square at a time.
Right. Which kind of highlights how even the most powerful people can be vulnerable.
It does. True leadership isn't just about authority, but about understanding your limitations, relying on your support system, making those calculated decisions. Like the king literally needs his pieces to protect him.
It's all about strategy.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, what about the language of chess? Our source points out some interesting terms.
Like checkmate.
Yeah, that ultimate winning move. I love how they explain the etymology of the word.
Oh, yeah. It goes all the way back to ancient Persia, from the phrase shah-mat, meaning the king is dead.
Wow, the king is dead. And from there, it traveled through Arabic, then French, and finally landed in English as checkmate. It's amazing how one word can capture, like, centuries of cultural exchange.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, how is checkmate translated in other languages? Do those translations have similar weight? Those historical echoes.
That's a great question for our listeners. Let us know how checkmate is said in your language, and if it carries the same feeling, that same history.
It would be so interesting to see those connections.
Our source also mentioned some other terms like diagonal, which we know is important for the bishops and those pawn captures.
Right. I mean, chess isn't just about memorizing moves. It's about spatial awareness, thinking in multiple directions at once.
It's like a mental workout.
It is. And then there's that moment, remember, when the dad calls the knight his little horsey?
So cute.
I know, right? But it also shows how language can soften the edges of something, make it more approachable, even in a game that's all about strategy and, well, defeating your opponent.
There's that playfulness. And they're using language to create this bond, this shared experience between father and son.
Exactly. It's like they're building their own little world on that chessboard.
It makes me realize how language can shape not just how we understand something, but how we feel about it.
Totally. Oh, and another interesting word choice. The source uses capture when talking about how one piece takes another.
Right, instead of kill or eliminate.
It's subtle, but it makes a difference. Capture suggests control, strategy, not just brute force.
Which really fits with the whole idea of chess as a game of intellect, right?
Exactly. It's about outsmarting your opponent, planning your moves carefully.
So we've talked about how chess reflects these real-world power dynamics.
Yeah.
And now it's even using language that suggests, well, I guess a more refined kind of power.
Right. It's not just about brute force, but about strategy, negotiation. It's almost like chess gives us a framework for understanding how influence works in different situations.
And how even small actions can have big consequences. Every move matters.
It does. Every decision can shift the balance of power. You know, our source doesn't explicitly talk about this, but I think it's worth mentioning. Chess, it's been around for so long, across so many different cultures. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think part of it is that it's universal. The rules are simple enough for anyone to learn, but then the strategy, it's so complex.
Definitely. And it's a game that can be played by anyone, regardless of age, language, background.
Right. And it teaches you these valuable skills: patience, focus, strategic thinking, things that are useful no matter who you are or where you're from.
It's like this shared language, in a way, and it brings people together. Even if you're competing against each other, there's this sense of connection, this mutual respect.
That makes sense. So going back to that word checkmate and its origins.
From Chaumont, the king is dead.
Yeah. The source mentions how its meaning has shifted a bit over time, like from the king being captured to implying this total final defeat.
It's interesting, right, how language evolves, how words take on new layers of meaning.
It's like this linguistic journey. And the source even encourages listeners to think about how checkmate is translated in their own languages and if it has those same nuances.
What a great way to get people thinking about the connections between language, culture, and, well, even a game like chess.
It is. It's reminding me how even when we're focusing on a specific source, there are always these other paths to explore,
Vocabulary
these other
preview.
Perspectives to consider.
Learning never really ends, right?
Exactly. You know, the father in our source, he mentions how the game ends when someone says checkmate, but he also uses the word check earlier on. Is there a difference?
Oh, yeah, there's a big difference. Check just means the king is under attack, but there's still a chance to get out of it.
So it's like a warning.
Right, like danger is coming, but you're not doomed yet. Checkmate, on the other hand, that's it. There's no escape.
So check is a threat, and checkmate is the final blow.
Exactly. And those two words, they really capture the drama of chess. The constant tension, the back and forth. Even when you're in check, there's still hope. Maybe you can make a brilliant move, turn things around.
That's what makes it so exciting. Every move counts. Every decision can change the whole game.
And you know, even though our source keeps things pretty basic, you can already see these deeper layers of strategy and psychology at play.
It's amazing, right, how we started with this simple father-son chess lesson.
And now we're talking about language, culture, history, power dynamics.
All because of a game.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about how each chess piece is like a different approach to strategy.
Oh, yeah. The pawn, the rook, the bishop, the knight.
Each one has its own personality, its own strengths and weaknesses. And they're like metaphors, right, for how we approach challenges in life.
Exactly. Like the pawn teaches us about perseverance, just taking things one step at a time, but always moving forward.
And the rook is all about planning, building a solid foundation.
Right. And the knight, well, he's the one who reminds us to be creative, to take risks, think outside the box.
So if I'm facing a tough situation, maybe I should ask myself, what would a knight do?
Exactly. Or think about it like this. What kind of chessboard am I playing on right now? Because once you understand the rules, the different pieces, your opponent's strategy, that's when you can really start to make smart moves.
That's a great way to think about it. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from learning how the pieces move to understanding the deeper meaning behind the game.
And we owe it all to that English learning podcast.
Who knew a father teaching his son chess could be so insightful?
It just shows you there's depth and complexity everywhere, even in the simplest things.
Before we wrap up, let's recap some of the key takeaways for our listeners.
So we started by learning how each piece moves, and we saw how each one has its own unique personality, you could say. Then we talked about the etymology of chess terms, like checkmate.
Which was fascinating, by the way.
It was. Traveling all the way back to ancient Persia, tracing that word's journey through different languages and cultures.
And we even connected chess to real life, talking about power dynamics, decision-making, strategy.
Right. Because those principles, they apply everywhere, whether you're on a chessboard or, navigating the ups and downs of life.
Exactly. It's like that father in our source material. He's not just teaching his son how to play chess. He's giving him a set of tools, a way of thinking that he can use in all aspects of his life.
And that's what we hope we've done for you today, given you a new perspective, a new way of seeing things.
So the next time you see a chessboard, remember, it's more than just a game. It's a reflection of history, culture, strategy. And it might even inspire you to make some bold moves in your own life.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Your move.